Well, here we are, fellow professors, for the first episode of our not very creatively titled weekly podcast called America at 250, the podcast. So I think the first thing we might want to do is make a plea to the crowd to do a little crowdsourcing creativity. We would be happy to have a more creative name if there is one out there. But for the moment, we are here.
Truth in advertising.
Exactly. To talk about the class and I think do what is the most exciting or one of the most exciting pieces of the course for us, which is to be able to learn from each other, talk to each other, debate history. Those who know us know that this could go on for hours and hours and hours, but we are going to try to keep it to about 45 minutes and just delve in a little more depth into what we've been doing.
By the way, I had suggested 3 titles for this podcast, but they were all so bad they were rejected.
Yeah, they were actually worse than the current title.
They were bad.
We won't name what they are,
so
but yes.
We're looking for creativity.
So we have started out the class hearing from Joanne Freeman. We've been talking about common sense. We've been talking about the Declaration. We've been talking about the Revolution. And David and I have been sitting there having some thoughts of our own. So, David, maybe you want to get us started with...
I'd love to. One big question, Joanne, that you addressed, but that used to be quite a controversial issue in scholarship, at least certainly when I was in graduate school. You portrayed a revolution here that was a pretty popular revolution. These other declarations, which is, I think, a revelation for most people from Pauline Mayer's book. And all of these local gatherings in townships and towns where they're debating, do we do this radical juncture in time? Do we take this risk? Reflect on that a bit more. If it was a popular revolution, that tells us this was not just a top-down thing by all the smart white boys in Philadelphia.
Wearing knee breeches.
Wearing knee breeches. It was something beyond that, and it was about their own sense of where they were in the world.
Absolutely. And, I suppose I hadn't thought necessarily about the fact that I was doing something that was different or new, but I will say that it's informed by what I see in the 1790s. So when the government starts, what you see are just Americans, general Americans, not the 10 guys in a room, who have a real sense of entitlement. That they fought in the revolution, they took part in the revolution, they took part in independence. So now they're entitled to some things. And so as we're going to see in, I guess, the week after next, when we get into the 1790s, there are American citizens who just feel that now it's their time. And they're going to continue to have a voice. Women feel that they're going to have more voice than they did, average Americans did. And so in a way, my looking back to this period and saying, the people had that sense of involvement and entitlement, I think that's true. And I think it becomes even more important to see when you see Americans voicing that once the government comes.
And true even, of course, of former slaves who write those spectacular petitions, all rooted in natural rights tradition, saying, wait a minute, we fought too.
And it's the power of that rhetoric, right? It's the power of the ideas and the power of the rhetoric and the ways in which they went so far beyond where the framers of these documents thought they would go, right? Yeah.
Although one of the things that really struck me about listening to this was the idea that this was a defensive war, right? This is actually a war that's about loss. And we tend to think of the revolution as this very, very forward-thinking, right? We're huzzahing on toward greatness and equality or at least nationhood. But the Declaration itself, common sense, they are all about betrayal and grievance and a kind of politics of loss. And I thought you talked about that very powerfully in your first lecture as well as in today's lecture. And it's something that I think we're going to see throughout the semester is the power not only of these big ideas, but of a sense of betrayal and grievance. We're going to see that in the 19th century with the populist movement. We're going to see all sorts of movements mobilize that over the course of the 20th century. So do those things go hand in hand? Do you read it in both ways?
Well, I think I mean, I think that's a great idea because I think, we also tend to, in a way, have very clear dividing lines between like radical and conservative and looking forward and looking back. And some of what you're asking about is, the revolution, certainly it's moving towards something, but you're absolutely right. It starts out and remains for a really long time a defensive thing, so that it's tempting to look at the revolution and say it's radical. But it wasn't initially. I mean, that's part of why I assigned common sense for this week, right? That is radical, but it's late in the game, right? It's only a couple months before we actually do declare independence. So I think those things go together because I think things that we might assume in the long view of history, looking back in time, that feel as though they're radical and new and leading to the now, in some ways, you're totally right. There actually were people hanging on to something and trying to figure out what comes next. I talked about that a lot too, right? Contingency that we forget, especially when talking about the founding.
And improvisation. I love your use of that.
Improvisation, contingency.
They're making it up as they go.
Yeah, they're making it up and they're looking forward in time. And that's so hard to remember in the founding period.
My favorite documents that we've looked at. So Common Sense is great, and we will get into Common Sense. But the two that really captured that sense of contingency and guys who aren't entirely sure what's coming next or what they're doing were one, that draft of the Declaration that you showed today with all of the crossing out and the rewriting and the painful experience of writing by committee. And then the document that you posted really as a supplement to Common Sense, which was John Adams' to-do list. And I was sitting there thinking about my own to-do list, which looked like that, except his to-do list is declare independence, raise an army, get some money,
deal
make
with France
all the
and
colonies
Spain.
work together, right? So
Produce
it's
bullets.
an amazing thing. Do you want to talk about those extra documents before we get into Common Sense?
And that's precisely one of the reasons why I include those kinds of documents is because, it's the most human of moments. It's John Adams like, what do we got to do? Here, I'm going to make up a list. And that's just not how we think about anything that's going on in this early part of the course, right? And the fact that he sits and makes that list of stuff that we have to somehow do, and the fact that some of the things he lists are so ambitious and so huge, he has really no idea sort of what's happening and where it's going and how big it'll be and how important it'll be. So with the draft of the Declaration, which the list that John Adams is making, I just think generally, if you're thinking about the founding writ large, you have to drum home the humanness of it, because we put that whole period on a pedestal, and it makes no sense on a pedestal because everything that they were doing was a struggle, and as you said, David, was improvisation, and the battles that they were fighting were partly within themselves as to what was going to happen and what they were going to do. So you can't understand that period at all if you see it as this golden, glorious, everyone knew what they were doing, heading off into the sunset, yelling huzzah. That eliminates everything that they thought that they were doing.
I had not read Common Sense in years. It is a fantastic, we overuse the word iconic, but it is an iconic document of many kinds. But first of all, tell us a little more on who's Thomas Paine? Where's he from? How did he get here and suddenly within a year write this amazing manifesto?
Within a year. So he's a staymaker's son. I had a parent who was a Quaker, but he was not particularly.
Do you want to say what a staymaker is?
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, wow.
Since those of us who don't live in the 18th century.
A staymaker.
Wear such things.
I know. If you're a woman, you sort of want to have the right sort of shape and figure. And so you would wear stays that would sort of keep you toned in
like
and
a corset.
sitting up. Like a corset. Thank you. That's a much better way of putting it. I was trying to come up with I'm going to talk about a female garment.
Actually, I don't know how much you could see. She was actually demonstrating. And
this is what, at any rate. He's not particularly religious. He comes to the United States. He talks about how he gets into, at that time, not the United States, but the colonies, and he can feel what's happening. He can feel that things, I think he says at one time, when things are stirring, he can feel that things are stirring. Yeah. And he already was beginning to write a variety of different things, some of them political, some not. And what he discovered very early on was that when he did write politically, when he was writing about the political situation, then he had an audience. People were listening to what he had to say. He could feel that people were plugged into that kind of conversation. So he gets pulled in that way. And then he befriends, among other people, Benjamin Rush, who's a big deal doctor at the time. And he comes from England, and he's not just sort of instantly poof writing things that are perfect on colonial soil. He has people he knows, like Benjamin Rush, talking to him about what's going on. I think Rush actually says something like, whatever you do, don't talk about republicanism or monarchy.
He didn't follow that advice.
It's almost like a dare.
Yeah.
But still, he was talking to people. He was reading what the public was interested in, and he was hearing what others were saying about what had happened before he got there.
I love the way he weaves his way into monarchy by reflecting really psychologically on why human beings are drawn to strongmen, to monarchs, to kings. Why do some people need kings, he goes on, as a way of setting up, of course, then pages about his word, absurdity of monarchy. I mean, I don't know if there is a more brutal takedown of monarchy in the whole age of the Enlightenment than common sense.
And that's one of the things that to me is so exciting about it is it's brutal and it's deliberately intended to be plain, blunt.
Oh, yeah.
Anyone can pick it up and read it or hear about it, and they're going to get the message right in their face.
He calls King George a brute.
The royal brute.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
And he plays with the ignorance of kings. They're uneducated.
So
they don't
radical.
know anything.
I particularly appreciated, since we're in a class of some 400 18 to 22-year-olds, that the fact that teenagers could become king and could become the monarch was
even younger.
One of the younger. That was the height of absurdity in Paine. So I thought that
But
was
it's also
funny.
because of that particular audience. It's important to remember some of what you're getting at here, David, which is how radical that was, right? Because
in the 18th century.
In the 18th century, I mean, we're so used to so many words and so many places spilling over us that we kind of forget the radical power in which words can have. And in this time period, not only is it effective and powerful, but it's kind of shocking.
Well, and you made the point that this pamphlet, which was in published form, 30 pages maximum, was the way in which so many of these common Americans or British subjects living in America, I'm practicing doing that because of your lectures.
Thank you so much.
But how so many of them gained a certain confidence about this whole idea of independence. And that idea of independence had been around. They've been protesting since the Stamp Act and even before. But suddenly, this man puts it into a language, including those soaring passages about how this is an affair of all mankind. It is not the affair of a city. It is not the affair of a town. It is an affair of mankind. It's like the whole world's watching what you're going to do here, and then you'll go on and tell them what to do.
Right. Well, this is really, in some ways, the birth of this thing that we're going to talk about a lot over the course of the semester, which is this idea of American exceptionalism on the one hand, and then of the United States standing in for something more universal, making some bigger set of claims. And that was controversial and problematic in this moment. It has been very meaningful and very problematic at many other moments. But is it safe to say, kind of Tom Paine's one who puts it out there?
I mean, and he's not the only one, right? The idea that there's this great experiment going on in, these colonies and then in the new nation under a new government, under the Constitution. That was their language, that, basically in the history of humankind, there are these moments where you have an experiment like this, and that we will actually, at some point, I probably will read this when I talk about the Constitution and the Federalist Essays. The first paragraph of the first Federalist Essay by Hamilton says that, if we fail in what we're doing now, it will be a tragedy for all of humankind that you can't come together in a room and talk about what a government should be, and that governments should forever be grounded on accident or force, that we're doing something different. So they very much had this very great confidence that what they were doing was new and different and better, right? And the new world was better than the old world, and the old world was watching because everything that we were doing here was better. And so on the one hand, there's confidence in that. On the other hand, there's extreme insecurity.
Oh, yeah, fear.
Because they're fear and also like,
what are we doing?
Those guys like, that's Britain, I mean, like they have all the
biggest
culture.
navy in the world.
It's the world of books. It's like, what do we have here?
Yeah.
So it's both of those things at the same time.
And he's not the first to use the term continental, but he employs it over and over. An affair of a continent. It needs a continental charter, a continental Congress. Well, pretty soon, that's exactly what they're calling it. Or they already are.
They already had a first continental
They
Congress.
already had the first continental
They're moving on
Congress.
to the second continental
Right,
Congress.
true. But that's the context in which he
for
puts
sure.
this affair of revolution. And to our students and to our vast audience out there, read this as an Enlightenment document and make your own list of the principles to which Paine is appealing here. Everything from reason to natural rights to anti-monarchism to consent to republicanism.
Well, and
they're all there.
to independence itself. I actually was wondering if you could reflect on this word independence, because on the one hand, it's a very practical word, right? We are going to form an independent nation. We're going to break away from the British Empire. But dependence and independence had all sorts of meanings that were much more personal, that were going to go on to shape what it meant to be a citizen. So you cautioned the whole class to think about these words in their 18th century context. So do you want to talk a little bit about dependence and independence and what those terms actually meant in this period?
For sure. And that's a great question, because dependence is very much old world, right? In the old world, there are like manufacturing and hierarchy and, not even just monarchy, but royalty and aristocracy, and everyone is dependent on everyone else. And that's, there's a real, when you look at the writings and documents and conversations of this early American time period, they're constantly talking about the corrupt, hierarchical old world that represents dependence. Thomas Jefferson never stops talking about, dependence bad, independence good. So independence, you're right, has a lot of different meanings. It can mean like yeoman farmer independence, meaning like I've got my farm and I'm independent and I don't rely on anyone and I don't need to be in a city and
Except
being a manufacturing.
massive slave labor force
Well, there
in
is
many
that too.
cases. But anyway.
But yes, well, that's like the reality factor. Thomas Jefferson is not always talking about that factor. But yes, so there is that idea of independence. But, a big part of the rhetoric of the colonial folk into revolutionary folk is, we're not subservient to Britain, right? We are equal to them. We're not, and they use the slaves. We're not enslaved. We're not slaves to them. So they also are kind of thinking of themselves in that context. That yes, we're part of the empire. We are British subjects, but we're also independent in the sense that we have our own legislatures. They're modeled after what's over in England, but they're our own. And to a certain degree, there's a we of some kind, a colonial British subject we in the colonies as well. So yeah, you're right. It has a lot of shadings. It's when it gets wrapped up in no more parliament, no more king, like really independent, like
we're going to have to make it up all over again.
Here we are.
We're going to call it a republic.
Right. And right. And that, we'll see as we get into more lectures and move into the later 18th century and early 19th century. They don't know really what they are. They like to say, well, we know what we're not. So we're not like that. Like we're not a monarchy, and we don't call each other, Earl or Duke, and we don't wear too much lace, and we don't, there's a whole dialogue about like we're not that, but that leaves a big hole as to what they are, and that's bound up in this too.
Paine knew his audience too, didn't he? I mean, there's a whole section of this document where he wanders back into the Old Testament. He makes the bold claim that the Jews never had kings, which okay. Go ahead, Tom. But he knows what he's doing there. He's trying to argue that the people of the Bible, the Israelites, were about fashioning an independence. Well, of course, out of the destruction of their temple and enslavement and all kinds of horrors along the way. But they were about fashioning themselves as a people, an old people and a new people. I mean, I found that section fascinating. He knows what he's doing with the Old Testament, whether he's right or not. Of course,
No, but he knows
who's
that
right about the
that's,
Old Testament.
That's the people he's writing for in a general sense.
They know that story.
They know the Bible. They know, this isn't like Latin to them. This is something that they know. Right. And it's related. You said a little while ago that if you read it and you think about all the things that are in there, republicanism and human rights and the course of humankind and everything, and you're totally right that all of those things are there. But then the counter side of that, they're all there, but they're tinged with, how can I put this so that they're going to get it, and they're going to get it in the way I want them to get it. So it's almost like you have to read Common Sense in a sort of double way. On the one hand, it is very much of its moment. It has like a lot of Enlightenment thinking in it, but that's put through a lens of popular appeal, and which is part of what makes it so powerful.
And he calls King George Pharaoh, Egypt and Pharaoh's at the heart of that story. And then when he takes up the question of whether there can still be reconciliation, I love this part. I've done a lot of study of the problem of reconciliation after an event later in this course. But his argument there is you cannot reconcile with some evils.
Right.
And monarchy is one of them.
Right.
It is so unnatural. It is so against human nature. It is such a violation of natural rights. You cannot.
It is unnatural.
Yes, yes. And there's something deeply biblical about that, too. What can you compromise with?
Right.
Well, Moses goes to the mountain and comes down with 10 commandments and all that, which we're not supposed to compromise with either. So, I'm not saying that this is a work of theology per se, but it's very interesting that he makes this an ancient story at the same time. This is all about what's new. What's possible now, what has to be done.
That's an interesting way of thinking about it, because throughout the early sort of late 18th century, early 19th century, Americans, sort of elite thinker, writer folk, are constantly looking for a past that they can use that isn't necessarily the British, the French. So like Jefferson, for example.
Classical past.
Jefferson uses Native Americans handily that way. Like, look at them. Like, they're noble. And those are our Greeks and Romans, which is piled high with problems in that logic. But they're constantly looking for ways to claim something old and noble and powerful that's different from what's going on in Europe. And I guess this also kind of plugs into that way of thinking, too.
He got the Greeks and the Romans into his architecture, right?
Yes, well, that too.
Right.
Well, and it is an interesting set of arguments as well. Right, this is a persuasive document. That there's lots of soaring rhetoric, but it's also trying to be persuasive about a certain set of tactical problems that are, in fact, facing these colonies in this moment, right? And the one that really stood out to me and is going to be a question that you see movements and politicians in every period of this course arguing about is the question of timing, right? Because what he is saying is not only are these good ideas, they're big ideas, not only is monarchy bad, but actually this is the moment to act. And
it's a strategic document.
Exactly. And when you look at the kinds of debates that were going on, whether it's in the Continental Congress or in some of the town meetings that you were describing, right? It's should we do it now is one of the big questions. And people have a lot of different opinions about that. Should we do it now, and how big should we go? So that really struck me about
for sure.
Paine. And as maybe the most important thing here, make the leap of the imagination, but do it now, because now is the moment where there's no going back already.
There's urgency and immediacy to it. And I love the idea of the way that you just put it. Again, with everything in this period, we sort of put it up here, they're writing about blah, blah, blah. But you're totally right. It's also a very specific political strategic document written by someone who is basically saying, now is the time to really think about and commit to independence. So despite all of the soaring rhetoric, in addition, that has a very specific purpose.
He even uses the rather slippery argument that now is the time, because if you give this any longer of these Americans, although he never uses the term Americans, if you give these Americans even longer to stay tied to this British system and crown and so on, it'll make it even harder for them to break. Break now. Don't live with us another decade or two. You'll like kings even more. Or I guess that's...
Which, like, slippery is a good way of putting that. Well, it's like, this might even seem like not as good an idea.
Well, in propaganda, a lot of arguments are slippery. It's all about how they're made. Right? And boy, can he lay on the rhetoric. I don't know if Benjamin Rush helped him with any. I doubt that. I mean, somehow I want to believe the soaring parts are Paine's.
No, I think they are. And if I remember correctly, Paine had a sentence in there in an early draft about how it was beyond time when, colonists shouldn't have to run down to the port when the ships come in to see how many rights they have left. And Benjamin Rush was like, no, cut that out. And I think that was...
There's a lot of wit in this.
There is.
There is.
I think Rush was
There's a lot of rage, too.
There's rage.
Yes, there is a lot of rage.
It's not a very well-controlled document in some sense, right?
It can't be. You can't have that argument, make that radical argument, traitorous argument in a controlled
One of my favorite lines in the soaring rhetoric, and I promise I won't read the whole paragraph. O ye that love mankind, ye that dare oppose not only the tyranny, but the tyrant. So we can talk about tyranny. We can talk about taxation. We can talk about stamp acts. We can talk about this act and that act. But now's the time to oppose the tyrant himself, the king, not just the king's advisors.
And one specific king.
Yes.
So it's about monarchy, but in that sort of strategic sense, right? He's saying, this is about this tyrannical king.
Yeah. He's giving people a right to hate the king in a world that was just
it's not even just the right. He's explaining why it's necessary.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think must hate the king.
Right. One of the things that was quite striking about your lecture today when you were talking about the Declaration was reminding people that this was an act of treason, right? And so we have the heroic signing of the Declaration, but one of the things that meant when you put your name down there was that if this didn't succeed and you lost, this was going to come at a rather great cost to yourself, not only to your liberty, but to your life, to your family. And so this public act of commitment that was happening in Philadelphia and in other places, that was the line that people were crossing.
Which they knew. I mean, that was what I found in talking about, the other declarations and the ways in which in towns all over, people were getting together in town meetings and they were asked by Massachusetts Assembly, these individual towns, to talk about what they thought about independence. And the way that they were asked that question was, are you willing to risk essentially your lives, your fortunes, and your sacred honor without using that language? Are you personally willing to risk that for this? Because that's what you're being asked to do. So on the one hand, that's a big, inspiring, collective question. It's also profoundly personal and scary, right? And it's kind of wonderful that it captures all of those things. And I'll mention for those who might not have heard when I mentioned it in the lecture, the book that comes from, the idea that there were all of these other declarations, is from Pauline Mayer's book, American Scripture, about the writing of the Declaration. It's a wonderful book that is written in a way that anyone and everyone can read it, and it captures the writing of the Declaration. But she has a whole chapter titled The Other Declarations that gets at this phenomenon that I think most people just don't know about, and that I find, and I mentioned it in the lecture, I find profoundly moving that people were coming together in groups to talk about it. And there was that one person I quoted in the lecture who said, this is the most important issue that ever came before us. We're talking about independence.
Those town halls used to be boring. They're not on this question.
They're not boring anymore. But just, that kind of gets down into your soul, this idea that this is the most important thing we've ever had to talk about, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to make a decision. It's just not the way we think about this whole period and everything that happens in it.
Well, since you brought up a historian, Pauline Mayer, in this class we have mostly assigned primary documents. You called them the you are there experience of history, right? You're going to have an only slightly mediated experience of looking to those documents, and that's most of what we're going to read. But historians write about these things too, right? There's a lot of literature out there. So What are the hot issues in the American Revolution sphere among professional historians? Like, where are they going? What are they writing about these days? Is it the kind of question that David said, a top-down versus bottom-up revolution? Is it about whether this is a popular revolution?
Radical
what
or
are people
not?
thinking about?
Right. Well, so for a while, I think that actually first top-down, bottom-up, and then radical or not. Gordon Wood wrote his book, The Radicalism of the American Revolution, which
Obligatory question in graduate orals.
That's right. So was it,
Well, we might as well have a value
Yeah,
add here for
These
the
are your
grad
oral
students.
exams.
and
Radical or
the
was it
teaching
not?
fellows. I think we have 6 or 7 teaching fellows who are doing
preparing
their
for their
oral
orals,
exams.
right.
this
That's probably
semester,
true.
so, yeah.
Double whammy for them. From that point, or a semi-recent thing, was really more of how what was happening was more of an Atlantic world moment and not just something about a handful of colonies and Britain. There are people now who are looking at the ways in which other colonies, Caribbean colonies, India, Canada. How was this playing out in the empire as a whole? And why did parts of the empire respond in the way they did and other parts of the empire not respond in the same way? So it's getting put, among other things, into a bigger context, and which I think particularly for this time period is really important because, again, I think the founding, which somehow I always have to say that way, the founding.
You do have a very particular expression, and
the founding. But we
That's
tend
come
to,
across, by the way.
my students in my lecture courses make fun of me for that. They're
Well,
like,
that's all
it's
right.
the founding.
That's endearing, though, I think.
I hope. I hope.
Okay.
But we tend to think about that in isolation. So, for example, when I talk about the Sedition Act in the 1790s and, the idea that you're not allowed to really insult the government, the public can't insult the government. Well, people don't think about the fact that there are similar things going on in England. People don't think about that. They're like, well, this is in America and it's bad for all of these reasons. Yeah, but let's think about the fact that it's not just happening in the United States and what does that mean? So that's an important component of this too.
And I do think that's going to be one of the challenges of our class is that we're moving through lots of chronology and lots of history, but we've sort of put the question of the nation state itself, it's coming together, it's breaking apart.
Its identity.
Its rise to power, national identity, political culture. That's really at the heart of what we're doing here, and that is going to allow us to see certain things over the course of the semester and not allow us to see others.
Right.
And this is probably one of those.
And all of that has itself been, of course, controversial. We've had colleagues and other historians who want to banish the nation state from our concerns and have.
Or not have it be the only bucket through which we think about history.
You're much more.
That's much more diplomatic. It should not be the only
very
bucket. But there is kind of a sometimes a kind of, or has been in the past, a kind of knee-jerk. The elites and the nation state, that's had the whole story for so
the
long.
The slavery question comes in here. The
right.
revolution
we shouldn't be, we got to move on and think about different things. Yeah. And, people sometimes say along the lines of, was this a popular revolution? Like, why are we always studying the same 8 guys in a room like this is a popular revolution, which is fine. But the fact of the matter is, in one way or another, the revolution is about power and who has it and who doesn't. And the people who are fighting and in one way or another thinking about and fighting for power are fighting against something. So you need, if you're talking about power, you need to talk about who has it and who doesn't and what the fight is. You can't look at one aspect of it and not acknowledge what those people are fighting against.
And I know you will be addressing this, as will we later, but for decades and decades, the question of slavery's juxtaposition with the revolution for liberty and independence has been at the heart of this scholar. I mean, Ed Morgan, all the way back to the famous essay he wrote on the American Paradox. Still, I think, a brilliant essay. And over the years, you're so right. It's become not only an Atlantic story, but a story of comparative revolutions, the Haitian Revolution, the French Revolution, and so forth. And then all that scholarship that spawned into studying slave rebellions as part of the Age of Revolution. So the American Revolution has always undergone these shifts and changes. But what we're trying to do here, it seems, is take us back to the basic documents here. What these American revolutions were doing, what they said they were doing, and that's so important. And look, here we have it. Maybe a central theme of this whole bloody course, that America is born in contradiction. It's born in this paradox. It's born in this.
Well, right. I mean, I talked about that today with the
It ain't gonna
Declaration,
go
right?
away.
No, like the Declaration itself testifies to these broad ideals, human nature, nature's God, equality, all of these things that
Doctrine of consent.
right, that they're huge and they're big and they're thinking about them sincerely in a very limited way, so that later people, I think certainly you're both going to be talking about this, who come along and seize on that as a founding
Especially
document.
the abolitionists.
That's it. And say, look,
Every day.
it's there. It's there. It's in writing. And we and they deserve that too. That contradiction is there from the very beginning, in which you have people pontificating about what's better about what's happening in the United States and how much more focused it is on rights and a finer way of sort of proceeding and not old world corruption. And a whole bunch of people aren't included in that promise. And that's, when you talk about the founding, that's a huge part of what people have to wrestle with. Is like, there's this, soaring language, and like Black Americans are not included.
We're 20% of the population. At that time.
Right, exactly.
Largest
Or
percentage.
women
ever.
or anybody else. That it actually is very focused on a small group of people. It just applies in such a sweeping way that is so powerful that for centuries people can take that and use that.
It's kind of all in how we ask the questions. It's also about emphasis. Because I'm just remembering here, as I look at my notes, that just before that incredible soaring passage about "O ye that love mankind," comes his line where he says, "But in America, the law is king."
Right.
Well, forever we've debated what is the meaning of rule of law,
Right.
and we're having a debate now. In case anybody didn't notice, there it is in common sense. The law
is king. We do not have kings. It's very,
Now that's
again.
That's a wishful urge. It's a wishful principle. At the same time, it's a real principle.
It's
getting
wishful in
aired
the sense
finally.
that that's what he wants, but it's real in the sense that what he's saying is we don't have kings here anymore.
It's true.
We are not going to have a king. In America, the law is king. Now, they have to sort of get to that point, but that statement and the first half of it, we don't have a king here now.
Well,
The
even
law
when they got
is
to writing a constitution, they made sure they didn't. But that's down the road here. So.
That's next Thursday.
Do
only
you
a
want
week
to
away.
tell us the sad story of the fate of Mr. Thomas Paine, who was often publishing these things anonymously, right? And
Tragic
he was a little
life.
bit cast out from the inner circle. Right?
Well, and he
was the
becomes he's a
agitator,
radical in ways that he
he's a
didn't.
radical, and that's the role that he plays. And he has a sort of sad early 19th century life,
He does. It becomes a controversy as to where he will be buried when he dies, because some people don't want the controversy of having him there, and he's a radical figure, and what will that mean? And
Like having Karl Marx buried in your backyard.
it would have been.
Didn't New Rochelle get him in the end?
I believe. Well, but we don't really fully
don't
know
We
where
don't
his
know?
whole body
Okay,
is.
okay.
This is the thing, right? Is that it wasn't clear where he was going to go.
They're not claiming him anymore.
And he was sort of shipped somewhere, and then he was brought back, but some of his bones ended up being sort of put in a carton in someone's storage shed while they were deciding where he would land. And then the person who owned the shed died, and he didn't necessarily make clear what was going to happen with Paine and his body. And then it's unclear where the box with the body went after that point. And so it's this long, weird, where is Thomas Paine? And I was saying, I think to you earlier, that every year I talk about this in my Revolution. There's a whole lecture about common sense, and I always look online to see if like any other pieces of Thomas Paine have been found, so that we know where he is. So but it's just in a way a different way of getting at the paradox, right? This person who writes these things that are so central to this moment and that are sort of ultimate American, but are also radical and controversial, and he ends up being twisted in that kind of
He writes so many
compromise.
other. He's a great essayist. Well, Common Sense is a kind of a long essay.
But these, these are the times that try men's souls is not from Common Sense.
It's from the American Crisis series, which he writes after Common Sense as a way of defending himself, right? Do I have that right? Against all these critics now.
And also,
he's got a lot of critics.
The war effort is going on.
Right.
At that point,
Stick with it is what he's basically
American
arguing.
Crisis means the war. We got to win.
Yeah. All right, we're getting near our promised time. So two things. One is that this is a reminder to everyone that you can send in emailed questions. We were not expecting to get a lot as we're getting started, but hopefully we will have some of those. We did get one question in, which was about Paine's outsider identity and how much that mattered in any of this. So I wonder, Joanne, if you have reflections about that. And then we might project a little bit ahead as to what's coming in next week's classes.
Week in America.
Exactly. And I will say, in a
big church near you.
practical sense, one of the things, students, that is going to be coming is a discussion of your first writing assignments that are going to happen in section next week. But it's worth going to the syllabus, looking at them. There's a little bit of a complicated scheme, but every one of them, I think, is going to be pretty fun and engaging. There's an archives assignment. There's an analysis of a public memorial. And then there is a letter in historical context. So you're going to talk about those more in section, but review them, think about them. We'll get into a little more detail with them here in the future as well. But Joanne, what else is ahead in American history? America at 250.
Coming soon in the next episode. So next week on Tuesday, we're going to be talking about the immediate legacy of the revolution, the 1780s. So the colonies and then states come together in that war effort, and then once it's over, they're basically like, see ya. And all of that sort of sense of togetherness evaporates.
We never liked you anyway.
That's right.
New Jersey.
You're perfectly nice, but we don't care. But then a lot of the spirit of the revolution plays out, states dividing, the state of Franklin, part of North Carolina breaks off and part of New York breaks off. And so we're going to see how the revolution is sort of playing out in that way and how it's alarming some people. So basically the 1780s represents, we unleashed things. What does that mean? And then Thursday, we're going to be talking about the Constitution. And we'll be talking about a little the Articles of Confederation, which they get a bum rap as a form of government because everyone says, what a sad form of government. But they're a perfectly logical form of government for a first try. And then we'll talk about the creation of the Constitution and what people were afraid of and not afraid of, and a little bit about the Federalist essays, which, like everything else in this period, are treated as, sort of biblical in their knowledge, and they're a commercial advertisement for the Constitution. And so we need to think of them as a persuasive document, not simply a descriptive document. So that's
it's like somebody who publishes their op-eds, right? Sort of.
Kind of, yeah.
Well, could I just say this too? You've raised so many great questions just in the first week. But one of them is this idea of tyranny and freedom. Simple as that sounds, but the American Revolution always has had this reputation issue. Was it just a bunch of rich people rebelling for their own commercial interests? Or was it more popular? Was it to defend slavery or against it, and so on and so forth?
This relates to the one question we got.
Yeah, it does. It does.
The question we got felt to me like what they were saying is, well, Thomas Paine is trying to get individual colonists involved, and yet the revolution is talked about as a collective effort, and how do those two things fit together? And I would say we tend to think in our times of rights as an individual thing. Right. We worry about our own rights, and part of what probably we'll be discussing next week, maybe when we talk about the Constitution at some point, but rights in this period that we're looking at are collective. Right? So Paine can be trying to get individuals engaged and involved and to break away psychological resistance, but he's doing that in the hope of corralling a group engagement, a collective sense of what's going on so that people will come together in the revolutionary cause.
And he's fundamentally challenging them. Go to your town halls and make a charter. Talk to each other. Sit down. elect delegates, because there's now going to be a bigger Continental Congress, and they're going to have to make it sure. Now, imagine you're back in one of those towns. I don't know how to do this. Well, maybe we've done a little local charter here, but my God, how do we do this? But I just wanted to make that point that, the world has always dealt with this question of tyranny in many forms and freedom as these opposites. But here's a template, and,
Go.
And I think this is going to come up. Well, you pointed out that Pauline's book is called American Scripture. That's the same label people are going to give to the Gettysburg Address later, which is even shorter. That's even shorter scripture. They're going to claim that because it's a rewrite of the Declaration.
Well, I will say you were finishing up lecture today by saying, okay, here's this document, and different parts of this document come alive at different times, the Declaration of Independence. I just finished writing a book that takes me back into the 18th and 19th century, and one of the things that struck me—
Welcome.
Thank you. It's a good place to be. I mean, it's a little unfamiliar
I'm biased,
to me,
I'll say
but
yes.
I'll
19th
hang
century
here for
was
a
just as
while.
long as the 20th.
But I was stunned by the number of people who set out writing their own declarations, right? That these forms themselves, they write their own constitutions. The Cherokee do this, right? The women's rights movement
Women
do
did it at
this. The
Seneca Falls.
abolitionists do this. The secessionists do this. And so we're not only at the beginning of a historical story, but we're at the beginning of a
tradition.
historical conversation and
Yeah.
tradition that many, many people are going to pick up, interpret, reuse, toss out, claim, disclaim, and that's where we're going.
Well, that's the fun of this. So I have to say, as I was pontificating today—
You have to finish up now. These are the final words.
The final words.
Yeah.
As I was pontificating today, and I was
about
thinking
fun?
about some of the patterns that I was setting out, what I'm looking forward to, because I know as I'm speaking, I'm like, oh, you guys are going to take off on this theme for sure. I can't wait to hear how the things I'm talking about now are going to spread out and play out in your time period.
You got to wait 6 more lectures, I'm afraid.
Oh, yeah, we do. But still, that's part of the fun of the course.
All right. We will be back next week with the tentatively titled America at 250, the podcast.
And we welcome everybody out there, wherever you are, to the podcast.
Yes.